So just to make sure everyone is here for client protection, how to MFI's mainstream client protection, that's what we'll be talking about this morning. I'll first introduce myself. My name is Kelly Hattel, and I am a consultant working in microfinance. I'm working primarily with microfinance associations throughout the region in Asia, and I've been working in the sector for about 15 years now, and I'm particularly pleased to be moderating the panel because this is a topic that has been of interest to me for a long time. I was part of the original Consumer Protection Working Group that was hosted by the SEEP Network, and out of that working group, the network that I managed, the Microfinance Network, we were one of the first networks to issue a code of practice for our members. And also, out of that working group came a document called Trust Through Transparency, if some of you are familiar with that, and a guide and a template. Those are some of the early efforts in microfinance to try to figure out how to address this issue of client protection. So that was in 2003. And so moving forward 6 years, we want today, this morning, to look at where are we at today in terms of client protection? How far have we come? And importantly, where do we go from here? We're very fortunate to have 3 representatives from different stakeholders in the industry, and we'll hear from a global effort to provide microfinance stakeholders tools to put clients first. We'll also hear from a leading commercial investor committed to client protection in its lending decisions, in its due diligence activities. And then finally, we'll hear from a successful microfinance institution from the Philippines that is working to put client principles into practice. So I would like to go ahead and introduce the people who are behind these efforts. First, we'll hear from Leah Netterman, who is a tool development specialist with the Action Smart campaign. She has a background in social performance management. Most notably, she was director of social performance management at Foconze, one of the largest microfinance institutions in Haiti. Next, we'll hear from Matteo Martinelli, and he is with, Marinelli. He is a senior investment analyst with Blue Orchard, and he is currently based in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. It's the first Asia regional office. Prior to that, he worked with microfinance institutions and other consulting firms throughout Asia, Thailand, Afghanistan, and also in Serbia. And lastly, we'll hear from Mr. Ruben Delara, who is the executive director of TSPI, a very large microfinance institution in the Philippines. He is also a member of the board of directors of the Microfinance Council of the Philippines, as well as the Banking with the Poor network, and brings a long history of private sector experience to his work in microfinance. So it's a great pleasure, again, to be here with you, and I look forward to some interesting information on what's happening in the industry, and then I'd like to have a lively discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Kelly, for the introduction. Like Kelly said, my name is Leah Netterman. I'm here representing the SMART campaign. If you see my body shaking and my teeth chattering, it's not because I'm nervous to speak in public. It's because it's so cold in here. Is anyone else freezing? It'll help keep us awake, I guess, here in the morning. So I'm really happy to be here with this distinguished panel. I'm representing the SMART campaign, which is a global industry-wide effort made up of people that believe protecting clients is not only the right thing to do, but it's the smart thing to do, hence the name SMART campaign. It's smart because what's good for clients is good for the institution serving those clients, which is good for the networks, good for regulators, good for countries and development. This campaign has really taken off in the past year and a half. We have about 13,000 individuals, MFIs, networks, investors, donors, regulators that have endorsed the SMART campaign. I think that you have all received a small card with the SMART campaign website on it and the principles of client protection on the other side. The principles of client protection are really the backbone of the SMART campaign. This is how we explain what is client protection and how do MFIs put it in practice. I'd really like to be able to go into what each of these principles for client protection is and what they mean in practice. Because of limited time, I'll save that for the question and answer period. But I would like to at least review with you what the SMART campaign has laid out as the 6 principles for client protection. They are, first and foremost, to avoid client over-indebtedness, transparent and responsible pricing, ethical staff behavior, appropriate collections practices, mechanisms for redress of client grievances, which is just a fancy way of saying that your clients have a way to communicate with you as an MFI about their questions, complaints, concerns, and you as an MFI have a systematic way of resolving those questions, complaints, and concerns. And then protection of client data. What does it mean to mainstream the principles of client protection or to mainstream client protection within a microfinance institution? I'm going to propose two different definitions for that. And again, I would encourage you to keep that card and be able to refer to these principles as I'm speaking. Mainstreaming client protection means that management defines clear priorities and policies for client protection within their institution and uses these when making decisions. It also means that all staff understand and practice the institution's client protection priorities at every point of contact with the client. This is mainstreaming client protection. Let me give you a little more detail on each of these. Management defines clear priorities and uses these when making decisions. In other words, management is aware of how the industry defines client protection. They've educated themselves on the issues, the tools, the resources that are available. They have assessed their institution's strengths and weaknesses in client protection, and the SMART campaign has a tool for MFIs to do that, which I'll talk about in a moment. They have defined their institution's priorities for client protection and have created policies to make their client protection goals a reality. So they're not just giving lip service to client protection and saying, sure, it's a great idea. They're actually internalizing it, creating policies and priorities for it, and then using these in daily operations. I like to illustrate things with examples. So let me give you an example of what this would look like in practice. Say the CFO or the CEO, rather, of a microfinance institution attended a conference, let's say in Sri Lanka in October of 2010, for the sake of example, and she learned about client protection. She got an idea of what the 6 principles were and thought, okay, this is something that my institution should be exploring further. You know, we stand for this, we put clients first, so this is something that my institution should look into. So she goes back to her institution, she educates herself and the other managers at her institution about client protection, which you can do very easily through the SMART campaign website. It's really a repository of a lot of the information that exists right now in client protection. She and the other managers at her institution sit down, they assess their institution, its strengths, its weaknesses, and they come up with one area that they really want to focus on in 2011. And that is having more transparent communication with their clients about pricing. So they set 2 policies for this, to put this into action. One is that all staff will receive training on how to explain pricing and loan contracts to illiterate clients. And 2, that the institution will now clearly spell out the mandatory enrollment fee for their microinsurance product. So management has taken one clear priority from the principles of client protection, which is transparent pricing, and now they're putting that into action. But it doesn't just stop at management. If we want to talk about mainstreaming client protection, institutionalizing client protection, it has to trickle down to all levels of staff. So all staff understand and practice the institution's client protection policies at every point of contact with the clients. In other words, all staff, from managers down to cashiers, understand what is client protection, why does my institution think that it's important, and why is it important in my particular role? Whether I'm a cashier or a loan officer or a branch manager, what does client protection have to do with me? They know how to make use of the institution's policies for client protection in their daily work, and when they're faced with difficult choices in their work, they're able to use their knowledge of client protection to act in the best interest of the client. They do this at every point of contact with the client, from sales and promotions with potential clients to collections with delinquent clients. And importantly, they can also assist other staff in understanding client protection, particularly new staff, and they help to create a culture, an institutional culture that is client-centered. Again, by way of illustration, let's take the same example, MFI. The MFI who defined two particular policy priorities in 2011. One is that all staff would receive training on how to explain loan contracts to illiterate clients, and two, that the loan contract would now spell out the mandatory enrollment fee for microinsurance. So at this same institution, a loan officer received this training for explaining loan contracts to illiterate clients. He learns not only why or how to be more transparent in pricing, in explaining pricing to clients, but also why it's important, the reason behind management taking this on as an initiative. The institution's new priority for client protection is evident to him because he receives the training, he sees the new loan contract with the fee spelled out, so it's evident to him that management isn't just talking about this, but they're actually doing something about it. So let's say several months later, after receiving training, he's sitting down with a new customer and he's selling her a loan. He asks her to carefully read through the loan contract before signing it, and she agrees to do so. After observing the new client going through this loan contract, he determines that this woman isn't actually able to read the contract, but she's not going to admit it. She doesn't want to admit that she can't read. So using his knowledge of the institution's new priority for transparency and pricing with clients, and the training he received from management, and also the institutional knowledge and the new culture that has been created with the institution, that being very transparent with clients is important, he decides to go through line by line the loan contract with this client and explain it to her before she signs it. This is evidence that he has really internalized the client protection priorities that management has put in place. This is what we mean by mainstreaming client protection at an institution, that everyone at the institution, from the management level down to the cashiers and below, are able to articulate what is client protection, why is it important to my institution, what is my institution doing about it, and how does it impact my role within the institution. Now, the SMART campaign for client protection and microfinance has created resources and tools to help MFIs in this effort, because I know that it's a challenge. It's easy to talk about this, but I've worked in several MFIs, and I know that this is a big challenge, especially when resources are limited. So before I sit down and let the others speak, I just want to briefly give you a glimpse of what is available to you as MFIs, as networks, and other stakeholders for mainstreaming client protection within your institutions. To mainstream client protection, REACT. This is the acronym that we have come up with to describe the process of mainstreaming client protection using the tools and resources that we have available. R stands for respond. This is the first contact that an MFI, a network, an individual, or other stakeholder has with the SMART campaign. We encourage every MFI that's interested in this to review the 6 principles for client protection, what they mean, our vision, why we think this is important, and then to endorse the campaign, which is simply to say that you put your name or your institution's name behind this movement. It doesn't involve any responsibility on your part. We don't have any mechanisms for making sure that you have good client protection quite yet, just by endorsing. This is just your way of saying that we as an institution think that this is important, and it is an important first step. We also invite you to respond by putting pressure on your networks to offer more services, information, and training around client protection to you as an MFI. And then because this is a global movement that we're still building, ideas are important. Your experience as MFIs are really important. So we encourage you to communicate with us what you're doing in client protection. That's part of Respond. Educate is the next step for mainstreaming client protection. And this refers to MFIs that want to dig deeper and get into the issues, which I'm not able to do in this presentation today. But the SMART campaign offers 7 PowerPoint presentations, one which introduces the principles and the SMART campaign, and one for each of the 6 principles. And these presentations are great for networks to use with their members or for MFIs to use with management to educate the people within your institution on what are the principles of client protection, what do they mean in practice, and what does it mean for us as an institution. So these 7 PowerPoint presentations are available on the SMART campaign website, and I'd encourage you to check those out as well. We also have SMART Notes, which are mini case studies of institutions and networks that are implementing client protection. So those can give you some good examples to follow within your own institution. And then finally on this, the Getting Started questionnaire, which we have available, is a great self-evaluation tool. It's for managers of MFIs to sit down and talk about the current state of their client protection practices. The guide leads you through a series of 43 questions that you answer based on where you feel like you are in client protection now. At the end of answering these 43 questions, this tool will automatically generate for you a graph of each of the 6 principles, and it will demonstrate to you which principles are you strong in and which principles do you have weaknesses in. And you can use this as a jumping off point for deciding what you want to prioritize in client protection. Because of course we don't advocate that you take everything on at once. Maybe you pick 1 or 2 principles and decide to do a pilot project or start a new activity in that area. So this Getting Started questionnaire is a great way to do that. Quickly to move through the others, the A in REACT is Assess. For institutions that have decided that client protection is a priority for them, they've gone through the self-audit, they have evaluated themselves, we encourage them to have an external evaluation. So this is where a certified SMART assessor visits your institution for a period of 3 or 4 days and does a very in-depth analysis of the current state of your client protection policies and practices. At the end of that period, you receive an in-depth report according to each of the 6 principles, how well your institution is doing fulfilling those. And probably more importantly, the SMART certified assessor that does the assessment of your institution sits down with management at the end of the process, goes through everything that he or she observed about your client protection practices while visiting you, and then helps you brainstorm, where do we go from here? What actionable steps can we take from here? So that's a SMART assessment. Change is the C in REACT, and that represents your efforts to improve the client protection practices at your institution. Once you understand what your weaknesses and strengths are and what you want to prioritize, we suggest that you pick 1 or 2 things, like I said, to pilot, to start to change within your institution. And make sure also that all levels of staff know why the institution has taken on this change, why they've made client protection a priority before beginning the pilot. The SMART campaign has and continues to develop tools, technical tools, specifically for MFIs to use during this change process. We're calling it the MFI Toolkit.